Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to my channel Home Economist. Types of stitches with names and pictures. The main categories of different stitches are: number 1, machine stitches. Straight stitch, basic stitch. We all know a straight stitch. Lovely little stitches all in a row. You can vary the straight stitch length to suit different fabrics or decorative looks. These will be the most used types of stitches on your sewing machine. Zigzag stitching. It can be used for seam finishes, applique, and stretch seams. If you are sewing swimwear, then zigzag is essential for sewing elastic in the legs and neck. Overcast stitch or overlock stitch is used primarily for finishing seams. Unlike a serger, it does not cut the raw edge of the fabric. For this reason, it is important that your edge is pre-cut neatly. A buttonhole stitch is very similar to a very narrow zigzag stitch. It is an extremely close stitch with very few gaps. Blind hem stitch is used for invisible wide hems on skirts and pants. This stitch will use a specialized presser foot called the blind hem foot. Decorative machine stitches are not used for everyday sewing, but rather for decorating your sewing projects. The number of decorative stitches will vary widely between machines and brands. Your sewing machine manual should tell you all the stitch names and settings. Lock stitch is a stitch function found on some computerized sewing machines. It starts or finishes a seam with a few tiny stitches instead of needing a back stitch. Second ones are hand stitches. Backstitch is another widely used type of stitch that can be sewn for seams or embroidery. For seams, it creates a stronger stitch than a backstitch that is less likely to split. While it does take a little longer, it is not that difficult. For embroidery, it can be used to create embroidery letters or to outline shapes that will be filled in by other stitches. Blanket stitch can be used on the edges of blankets and to join pieces of fabric together. It is a different stitch that can create pretty embroidery flowers and is a popular stitch for applique. Buttonhole stitch. It is similar to a blanket stitch. It is suitable for buttonholes and decorative stitching for flowers. It is sewn right to left, which is in the opposite direction to the blanket stitch. Catch stitch is used to hand stitch hems and is specially suited to thicker fabrics such as a wool. The inside of the hem looks like a series of small cross stitches, while the outside has almost no stitching visible. Chain stitch is a useful stitch for outlining as it creates a thick border. Use these types of sewing stitches for the outside of letters and shapes, including embroidery flowers and stems. Chevron stitch is one of the great types of stitches for borders and filling larger areas. It is worked from left to right along straight rows that can be separated or joined together. Couching stitch is a way of stitching over thicker threads and even fabrics to create endless shapes and lines. To create this stitch, you lay down the thicker thread on the surface of the fabric in your desired pattern and then use a thinner thread to stitch over it. Cross stitch is a popular hobby where whole designs can be created from this simple stitch. The stitches can vary from really small to a large and normally done on open weave fabrics, where you can count the threads to make them even. Faggoting is one of the types of stitches that are used to join two pieces of fabric. It can be used as an open border on napkins and tablecloths. Faggoting is usually very fine and can look like lace inserted between the fabrics. Feather stitch is a free-flowing stitch that is popular for small stems and leaves. It is sewn between four parallel lines and is best for embroiderers of an intermediate level. Fern stitch is another stitch, like a feather stitch, that is used for stems and embroidery leaves. It is much easier to do even without drawing guidelines. It can be straight or gently curving, making it great for sewing flower gardens. Fishbone stitch is not usually used to sew fish, but rather to create padded leaves with an interesting crossover effect in the center. The leaves can be pointed or rounded at the ends, making them versatile in sewing embroidery leaves. Fly stitch can be used individually to sew interesting little V shapes or joint for embroidering leaves. This is an easy stitch for beginners. French knots involve twisting the thread around the needle before it is inserted into the fabric. The knots can be used to create fireworks and small flowers such as lavender and are great as the centers of flowers sewn with other stitches. The size of French knots can be varied by the number of times the thread is twisted around the needle. Herringbone stitch is mostly used for borders or, if joined together, a filling stitch. It is worked from right to left between two parallel lines and is relatively easy. Invisible stitch is also called ladder stitch or slip stitch and is used to close open seams on toys, bean bags and clothing. It is stitched into the crease of the opened seam in a zigzagging pattern before it is pulled close. As the name suggests, it gives an invisible closure when sewn in a matching color thread. The lazy daisy stitch is a type of chain stitch used to create flowers and daisies. You can vary the number of petals and the size of the center to create different looks. It is often used in conjunction with the French knot in the center. Long and short stitch is also known as brick stitch and consists of straight interlocking stitches that form a solid block. It is often used to delicately shade shapes. Sashiko embroidery stitch is a variation of the running stitch done in intricate repeating patterns. A traditional Japanese stitch, it is a traditional art form that is easy to do but extremely effective for filling large pieces of fabrics. Satin stitch is a filling stitch used for any shape you can imagine. It is best for smaller shapes as long threads may catch in larger ones. A satin stitch may be used by itself or with a backstitch to create a cleaner border. Seed stitch, which is also called rice stitch, is used as a filling stitch. It is essentially small random running stitches done in a simple up and down motion. The stitches can be all different colors or one color. Slip stitch can be used for seams and, more importantly, invisible hand hems. Stitches are placed in the crease of the hems so that when done with a matching thread, it is almost invisible. Smocking refers not to a single stitch but rather a group of stitches used to gather fabric without elastic. It is both decorative and functional. Split stitch is used for outlining and creating simple designs. It is considered a straight stitch and is formed by splitting the threads in half. The outline from this stitch is thick and rope-like, making it more of a statement stitch. A stem stitch is used for stems and borders and produce a thick rope-looking line of stitches placed at a diagonal. It is thicker than a running stitch or backstitch and gives more of a three-dimensional look to stems. The straight stitch, when used as an embroidery term, refers to a group of hand embroidery stitches rather than a single stitch. These are all stitches done in a straight line and can be used for unlimited purposes. Examples include the running stitch, back stitch, fly stitch, and fern stitch. Web stitch is a round woven stitching type that can be used for webs and makes lovely roses. Use a contrasting or matching thread for the weaving and spokes for different looks. Whip stitch can be used for applique and for sewing the seams of felt and other fabrics that don't fray. It is also a popular stitch for stitching together pieces of knitting and crocheting. Running stitch. I put this stitch first even though the rest of the list is alphabetical because out of all the hand stitches, this is the one that gets used the most. It is quick and super easy. Even beginners can do this stitch. So my dear subscribers and unsubscribers, let me know which one is your favorite and don't forget to subscribe and share my channel. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.